Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I have with me a very, very successful and interesting entrepreneur from Australia, Mr. David Cordover. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
David is the founder of Kids Unlimited. He's an entrepreneur, a mentor, and an angel investor. So, David, let's talk about Kids Unlimited. Tell me about this venture and your motivation to start it.
Yeah, so Kids Unlimited is an enrichment provider, and it all kind of came about, as most entrepreneurial journeys do, with a story about myself and a problem that I wanted to solve. And so I can still remember a day back in about 2014, where I had on a Friday afternoon, I had to finish work early every Friday afternoon to take my son to a swimming lesson. And so I was sitting in traffic in Melbourne at 3:30 in the afternoon, having finished work at 2:30 so that I could get to school to pick him up, and started thinking about how much time and energy was being spent to take my son to this half-an-hour swimming lesson.
Wow.
And it wasn't about the $15 or $16 that we were paying for the lesson. And when I worked it out, it was something like 15 man hours that were being used to get me to finish work early, take the car, go to school early, pick him up, get him to the swimming lesson. My wife would be picking up another child at the same time. We had a grandparent picking up a third child and an au pair at home looking after a fourth child. And there was just a lot of time being used for this one activity.
Correct.
So it got me thinking about all children need to be doing extracurricular activities. It's a major part of growing up.
Correct.
What if all of those activities were closer together and more convenient for the parents? So we started a company called Kids Unlimited. We got ourselves a building, and we put in 6 or 7 different activities all in the one location. And the idea at the time was that it would be like a shopping mall for children's activities. Kind of think a shopping mall meets Disneyland, and kids could just come there. There would be one trip for the parents, and they could spend 2 or 3 hours, and they could have siblings there, and it would just be a much more convenient way for children to participate in those extracurricular activities.
And what were the areas that you started off with, and what areas are you working in now?
Yeah, sure. So I guess when we started, we had already a deep involvement. We had a company that was doing chess programs in schools, and so chess became kind of a staple in the programs that we were running. But then we also looked at what skills and programs would be needed for young people to become most successful adults as they grew. And so we had science programs, we had coding, robotics, and it was to start off with mostly in that science, technology, engineering, maths, that STEM field. Since then, we've expanded from that, and we've now got karate and soccer and other physical education programs. We've also done cooking programs, arts and design. We've got programs in sort of public speaking, and we've even got an entrepreneurship program as well now.
Wow!
So we've kind of started with that sort of STEM focus, and then have branched out, and we've now got 18 different areas. All of this was in metropolitan Melbourne, and of course, like with any entrepreneurial journey, what you think is going to be a good model to start off with isn't always the right model. So we started with 5 different locations across Melbourne in these centres, and then we actually recognised after a couple of years of building physical locations that it was much better to be working through schools. And so now our model is that we provide an exclusive service to schools where we can provide all of their extracurricular programs. And this is, again, another level of convenience where previously schools might have 30 to 50 different providers coming on site each school term. to run these extra programs at the school.
Mm.
But managing 30 to 50 different people is a huge job for the school.
Correct.
So when Kids Unlimited can be a one-stop shop,
Mm.
we can come in and we can offer this broad range of different activities,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that the school hadn't even, it wasn't even aware of.
Mm.
And then, of course, we can help them, in a much more convenient way, because they're only dealing with one relationship, and they know that, okay, after that, it doesn't matter how many subjects, how many programs are being offered. So that's the story. Yeah.
Fascinating. But tell me, David, the whole idea was because you were stuck in a car for 1 hour. By being able to offer these in different schools, are you taking the commute out for parents?
Exactly. So now the programs are now running at school immediately before or after school, or sometimes even during the school day at lunchtime, or children are coming out of class. So it means that the parents don't even have to do that one commute where they would take them from school to the extracurricular center. So yeah, we've made it even more convenient is the idea.
Wonderful. You also state, when I was reading about you, that Kids Unlimited turns interest into excellence. Help me understand this with some examples.
Yeah, sure. So we have a philosophy of education called a T-shaped learner, and that's what we're trying to build. And a T-shaped learner is something that is becoming more and more widely recognized as a valuable set of skills. And what a T-shaped learner is, it's got a breadth of experiences, but a depth of expertise in one of those. And it's that breadth of experience that is really important. And you can read, modern writers like David Epstein, who talks about generalists and about the value that comes from having experience in many different areas.
Yeah.
So what we do is we offer programs, a breadth of programs to students, knowing that particularly in primary school, in the ages of, say, 7 to 10 or 12 years old, it's natural for children to be experimenting and trying different things. When they find something that they are truly interested in, because they've had an opportunity to experience a number of different opportunities, then they can drill down and develop expertise and really go further. And what we can offer schools, for example, is a much wider breadth, because we're a specialized extracurricular provider, a much wider breadth than they could find themselves. And then we can also provide tutors and teachers who have got much deeper expertise and can take the children a lot further down that journey. And we've had that, for example, with coding, where we've had students who get involved in a sort of try and learn and try type of program, and then they find that it's something that they become passionate about, and then they can end up actually developing apps for the App Store, and sometimes even commercializing those things and running them as commercial opportunities. We had one student who created a business for himself, where he would take projects from Upwork, which is an outsourcing site, and he would repost them on Upwork, and he was just the middleman, and he would organize somebody to manage. He would be managing the project and solving it for one person, but charging a higher rate. So just interesting different experiences. And there's dozens of examples where we've got students who find their passion, who get very excited by some particular subject. It could be chess, where we've got. Chess, we've had an involvement for a long period of time. And so we've now got students that we worked with when they were 6 and 7 years old, now coming back and actually working in the industry and developing themselves a career in that field. So, it's about that breadth of experiences leading to finding a passion that you can then really, become excellent and get that deep expertise in some area, an area that you want to. Which I think it's a much more sustainable approach to education, and what I saw, when I was growing up, and maybe you were in the same situation, there were these tiger parents. Correct. Where they take the children to maths tuition and violin lessons, and it didn't really matter what the children were looking for.
Correct.
They were pushed very early on sometimes to become prodigies. And I think what we're realizing in the world now is that head start is not really a head start.
Absolutely.
You know, the fact that you're a genius mathematician by age 10 because you've been doing so much work for the last 5 years doesn't actually give you any advantage in the long run.
Correct.
You get a much bigger advantage by having a broad range of experiences, starting maths when you're 10, using that natural ability and interest, and then by the time you're 15, you're the same place you would have been if you'd been kind of hothoused through your early years and you're a child prodigy, but you're now at this same point with a much broader set of experiences, which makes you a much more creative thinker.
Very well said. And, you know, everything that you just told me about tiger parents, I'm so familiar with it in India because we are a high pressure situation, large population. And I mean, I've been seeing it since the time I was a child, and I'm now 65 years old. But moving on, I mean, really wanted to ask you, how are parents, and when I say parents you now have are probably millennials or Gen Zs, how are the younger parents reacting to the work that Kids Unlimited is doing for their children?
Yeah, I think they're really embracing it because, you know, I guess a lot of them have grown up with tiger parents themselves.
Correct.
And everybody always wants the best for their child. Everyone always wants their children to be better than what they were.
Correct.
That's natural. And, you know, you can't ever get away from that. What the parents are now looking for, though, is a way that their children can be better than them, but with a humanistic approach, with a more personalized approach. So they're actually looking for things that the children are interested in, not saying, right, well, I know best for you, and pushing them down a particular track. And I think we see that, you know, a little bit with, I guess, some of the sort of more personalized education, or the more relaxed education style that is coming across the world, where those exam focuses and that hot housing, you know, it's realized that creates a lot of pressure and a lot of stress and negative outcomes for students mentally, and doesn't necessarily give them better academic outcomes or life outcomes. And so now, you know, coming with the fact that, you know, we walk around with mobile phones in our pocket with all the world's information, you know, at a touch of a button.
Yeah.
You know, the parents recognize that in order to succeed, in order to become, you know, a 21st century learner and therefore a successful adult, it's not about what you know, it's about the skills that you have. And I think more than that, they're transitioning now, and when we look into the future, not just the knowledge and the skills, but also the attitudes that the children have. And you know, I guess that realization that, you know, all the knowledge in the world isn't going to help you become successful. It's about the skills that you have to apply that. That's where we're at the moment. And what we're seeing in the next 5 and 10 and 20 years is the realization from parents and educators that all the knowledge and all the skills in the world still isn't going to help you. You need the right attitude. And developing that attitude of, you know, of a lifelong learner, of a creative thinker, of a problem solver, you know, that's part of what we have to do with children as well.
Correct.
And that's where extracurricular programs are so critically important, because that it helps them to develop that hunger, that appetite for learning.
Very interesting. David, you also focus a lot on chess. And, you know, you mentioned it a few minutes earlier as well. I wanted to ask you, why is chess good for kids?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a passion for chess. I've loved playing chess for my whole life. But it is a really good way of developing transferable skills and developing attitudes about learning and about life, really, that can be applied, you know, initially in this game environment, which is fun and exciting and engaging for kids. But then those same skills and attitudes help you in life. And so I found, particularly as an entrepreneur, trying to build businesses, across Australia and across the world over the last, 25 years, if I didn't have the ability to think ahead and analyze problems and, select the best, what I think is the best option at the time, and then accept that sometimes the path that you chose isn't the right option, which is all comes from playing chess, where I picked a move and then I thought it was the best move, and I get to the end and it's like, well, actually, you still lost. And so the ability to then pick yourself up, try again, and they talk about failing fast. This is the startup community in the entrepreneurial world. It's been great to see how how vibrant that's become, and how much people around the world are really taking to entrepreneurship. But I think a lot of the skills that you need can be actually taught from chess as a metaphor. So it's a really engaging, interesting, fun game. And I'm not saying chess is the best game in the world. There are many games, but chess has this unique position in the world where it's been around for 2,500, 3,000 years. Correct. Actually, it started in India, and we have this culture of chess, these thousands of years of history, of stories, of personalities, of knowledge that's built up around it, which you don't have in some other games, which are maybe equally as strategic and equally as valuable learning tools.
Right.
But chess just has this, this really rich and warm history that makes it so engaging for students. So I think everybody should learn how to play chess in the world, not to become a grandmaster, but to develop some problem-solving skills, to develop some resilience about, an understanding about winning and losing, to develop some analytical skills, which, actually, when you look at some of the curriculums around the world, the skills that you're learning in chess are the same as what they call digital literacy in Australia, or you can also call computational thinking, which they're teaching children through coding now as well. And so it's the same skills, but presented in a kind of a different format. I think it's a fantastic game.
I agree. And do you see a lot of the kids who are part of Kids Unlimited taking up chess as something they like?
Yeah, look, chess is one of our staples. It's one of our mainstays, because we've had a very long involvement in chess. I personally have. So it was always something that we really wanted as an extracurricular program. Because it really does let children progress very quickly at a very young age if they want to. And it's really fantastic sort of confidence building for a 6-year-old when they're beating and playing on equal footing with 12-year-olds or with adults. Absolutely. It gives them the belief in themselves, which is such an important attitude to have. Like, yes, I can do it. I can do anything. The fact that I'm 6 years old doesn't mean I can't play against an adult. So chess is it's maybe in almost all of the schools that we work with, are very close to all of them, and we do encourage probably 40 or 50% of our students to get involved at some point with a chess program, because I think it's a fantastic activity.
Amazing. My next question to David is, we've just started to come out of the pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted extracurricular activities, especially with so much homeschooling going on?
Wow, the pandemic was an incredibly difficult 2 years. In Australia, and we're in Melbourne. Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. So we had basically 2 years where the children only went to school for 13 weeks over those 2 years, and it wasn't in a row. It was like a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there. So it was extremely disrupted. We were, we could see very early on, March 2020, when the first school lockdown, I think it was March the 9th, 2020, the first school lockdown in Melbourne. By the 23rd of March, all the schools were in lockdown. And we were, I guess, lucky that in that period, we recognized the potential devastation that was about to happen. And we took our skills in business and technology to move all of our programs to online delivery.
Okay.
So on the 23rd of March, we had about 170 programs that we moved on that day from on-site delivery to online delivery. And so we could maintain those programs for students as we went into the pandemic. So as we went through the pandemic, it's a very interesting, I mean, we could spend a whole episode just talking about, how the pandemic affected learning and education and students in general. I guess to answer your question directly about now that we're out of the pandemic, what we're seeing immediately out of the pandemic is a natural kind of fear and uncertainty where people have come out of a very unstable period and they're finding it very difficult to do something new, because to do something new you need confidence, and people don't have confidence in the world right now. So what we saw through the pandemic was that as a school would open, the appetite for extracurricular activities was 3 times as high as normal because people were starved for it.
Correct.
But now that as the pandemic went on longer and longer, it built more and more fear and distrust and disruption into people's lives. And so we're coming out of it much slower than we did as halfway through the first year and at the end of the first year and all those times that we started emerging. So I think people are finding still finding their feet. What we've, I guess, seen is that first 6 months, people were very nervous to coming back to normality. And what we're seeing in the second half of this year, and we're now in August, is that numbers have gone back to pre-pandemic levels. And I think they will continue to expand because, another one of those, I guess, those mental shifts that happened across the last 2 years were that people realized that they need to do what they are passionate about. Right. We saw things like the Great Resignation, where people change jobs because, if I'm not loving this, there's more to life. Yeah. So this is what we're seeing, that there was a real fear of going back to normal. People were, I guess, used to being at home. They had to cover off on their basics, their reading, writing, arithmetic. They had to get back into the routine of school. You can imagine there's a whole group of students who are 7, 8 years old who've never been to school before, and normally they would have had 2 years of learning how to function in that environment. So they're stabilizing themselves. And by the end of this year, I think we're going to see the demand for those extra programs much higher than it was pre-pandemic levels, as people go, well, they now have seen firsthand, for 20 years we were teaching programs and I was involved in education pre-pandemic. And we always talked about resilience, but we're very lucky in Australia. We have a very wealthy country, a very comfortable country to live in. And we never really knew why we were teaching people about resilience. We didn't need resilience. We didn't need it until we needed it. And then through the pandemic, we saw this is what resilience is. This is why we've been learning that. And so, I think there's going to be that, now people feeling more comfortable. Okay, this is something, COVID is something we're going to live with. And we have to work on those, problem solving, those creative thinking, those diverse programs that are the sorts of things that helped us to mean that the pandemic was a 2-year blip rather than a 5-year or a 10-year disaster.
I agree.
So I think
well said. Well said. I have time for one more question, David, and this question is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your amazing journey in the world of education, supporting so many children, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your learnings and from our conversation?
So I think the first one is about attitude.
Yeah.
That you have to believe in yourself. Yeah. And you have to be willing to try. Yeah. So show up. Opportunities come to people who show up. Yeah. And so, take all the opportunities that are available to you, show up, don't be afraid to fail or to make mistakes, because that's going to happen, all the time. And that will just make you stronger. Wonderful. So I think being a generalist, taking a breadth of experiences.
Mhm.
You know, if you're interested in coding and you want to become the next Bill Gates or the next Steve Jobs or the next Elon Musk, don't just be a coder. You know, look at what the most successful people in the world are doing now, and they've got broad ranges of experiences.
Correct.
People are saying, well, how does Elon Musk do it? How does he manage all these different companies in different domains? You know, as an entrepreneur or as someone who wants to be successful, even in an employment situation, understand a little bit about a lot of different things. Really spread your wings and get a breadth of experiences in lots of different areas, because that's going to help you become more creative. You take something from one area and put it into a different area, and all of a sudden you're a genius, because no one ever thought of doing that before. But it's exactly what someone else has been doing maybe for 100 years in a different domain.
Fascinating. David, on that note, and what you just said, believe in yourself, have the right attitude, be a generalist, show up, don't be afraid to fail. Thank you so much for speaking to me and for sharing some amazing thoughts. I mean, I learned the term T-shaped learning for the first time. I had no idea what T-shaped learning is. Thank you also for talking to me about chess and how chess can, build some amazing values and strengths in children. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.